Hey, what's up, everybody? Hope you're having a great day or great week, depending on when you are listening to this. Uh, and just first and foremost, just welcome to Equip the Podcast. You know the saying, stay ready so you have to get ready. And I got another cool episode for you guys. And I took a break last week because, I had a lot of stuff that was going on. Nothing bad, of course, but stuff I had to take care of. So I just wanted to take a week off. And, some things that happened over the week that's happening, I think called for me to make this episode, and I think it's very important. And this one ain't gonna be really, really long, and it might be a little bit different from the other episodes that I talked about. But I think it's something that could be very informational and something that can help you a lot. So we all kind of know like the Kyrie. This episode is not necessarily like it's not going to be about the Kyrie Irving situation because everybody's talking about that and having their own takes and things of that nature. But I'm just using that for I think even a bigger conversation, right? And I think with the whole Kyrie Irving situation too, I think it could have honestly, I think it could have been avoided, and he still could express what he wanted to express. It still could have been avoided. I think the major issue was with him, and Grant, he's not, he's not anti-Semitic and all this other stuff. People trying to label him as and all this other things, but I feel like research is a key thing here. And what I mean by research is I feel like if he did, you know, research or at least listen and watch before he posted or shared something, he could have probably saved at least more of it. So because at least he would have seen what was in it and was like, you know what, I might not post this one. You know what I'm saying? Because of what's in it. Or if he does share it, he could at least be like, look, guys, I think this is some interesting stuff that we need to start looking at. But there are some stuff that's anti-Semitic that's in here, and I, disagree with that. But, the sentiment, I feel like it's good information we need to look at. So that way, at least he sees it, knows it, and he can already jump on top of it. But, he didn't watch it first and shared it, and some people knew what was already in it, and then, he didn't want, apologize, and then that's when they did everything they did to treat him and all this other different stuff, right? I think the bigger thing is the fact of research, how to actually research, why is it important to research and things like that. Because at the end of the day, we all should be wanting to find what the truth is. Or if you believe, like, obviously if you're, I guess, an atheist or agnostic, maybe you don't really care about finding the truth. But for everybody else, I think it's important to find out like what's the truth or how to actually look for the truth or what ways we should do it. Like how do we actually do it? Because I just think with Kyrie, I think the main issue that sticks out to me, in my opinion, is just the fact that he didn't really watch or look or did the research first before he shared something which had something in it which got all this scrutiny in it. You know what I mean? And I think for us, it's just like I feel like we're in a community where stuff gets shared a lot on social media, memes get shared a lot, and stuff isn't fact checked. I think everyone has that. Like everyone shares memes and things like that, but we really don't fact check what it is. We just assume it is maybe because we might agree or might sound something that we like, but we don't really fact check to make sure it's true or not. And sometimes, and that's how a lot of untrue information gets passed around so fast because people just hear it, don't investigate it or nothing like that. And I think the important thing is the fact that we all deserve true due diligence when it comes to investigating and researching, making sure it's fair to us. I don't care if you're black, white, whatever. That if you are researching and looking at something, like it's fair to you to make sure you're actually checking it and making sure that it's actually true. Like I think you're doing yourself a disservice when you don't actually check things instead of just sharing it, right? So I kind of want to just talk about how to actually do it in like a very simple way, like how to actually do research, step by step, because I feel like people don't care to put in the work to do so, or probably don't know what to actually look for when it comes to actually researching something that's like historical or history and things like that. And I kind of just want to show an easy link or easy steps for us to like follow through to point us on how to do research. And actually can be very beneficial to us, whether you're a believer in Christ or not, or just looking for the truth, period. I think it's very, very helpful. So real quickly, I'm gonna share my screen. And I'm gonna put up this link. I'm gonna just get right to it today. Hold on. Let me get right to it today. All right, let me share my screen. Okay. All right. So this is from Masterclass articles, and this is a simple article saying how to do historical research. 5 tips for studying history. right? I think this is the most simple way for us to know how to do history, like learn and how to search things historically, right? So let's just get right into it, honestly, right? Let's just get into it. So number one, they said the step is to keep the big picture in mind. If you approach your historical research as a big picture examination of a person or a time period, you can make studying into a creative activity rather than just a bunch of memorization of historical data. As you do your research, think about broad trends, cultural themes that impacted the subjects you are studying. So I think this is a cool first step to think about too. Is like try to make it creative. Try to make it, because I think making it creative on what you're studying or whoever you're studying on, finding different ways to make it creative helps you remember the information better. Because sometimes, like especially like a history class and all this other different stuff, they just be like, they focus on memorizing. Okay, this person's born this day, this time, and this time frame, and this time date, and stuff like that, which obviously is important, but it's kind of harder, especially as you get older, to memorize a whole bunch of dates and names and stuff like that. But to find different creative ways to help you in your research, right? So I think that's good to keep a big picture in mind. Then, step two, always take notes. If you're properly studying world history, like for example, United States history or history of a particular cultural phenomenon, you'll be bombarded by more facts than anyone could possibly memorize. To keep information manageable, you'll need to develop a note-taking habit. If you own your own history books, you can make notes in the margins of the text, all those sticky notes, blah 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 blah, flashcards. So pretty much, this is a huge step because this is reminding you to take notes. Because obviously, you're not going to remember all these dates. You're not going to remember these time periods. You're not going to remember these locations, right? So as you're actually researching something, take notes, write stuff down. Like, like there is what's the saying that you forget 80% of the things you hear. So if someone's just telling you this, or you just watching a YouTube video or watching some video of someone, or even your own teacher, like think about in class when they're telling you to take notes. Why are you taking notes? Right? Think about that. Why we take notes? We take notes to look back at it after we hear it, to remember the information that's been said to us or what we read, things like that. Because you're not going to remember it off the first time hearing it. You're not going to remember from the first time reading it. You're not going to remember it. Like even when it comes to songs, you know why we remember songs? Not only because of the catchy beats and hooks, but repetition. Right? You hear it all the time on the radio. Your friends are always playing it. You're always playing it. And the more you listen to it, the more it gets into your head, the more you're able to memorize it. It's all about repetition. So when you're taking notes, you're able to look back on it and to reread it over and over again. And eventually, it will stick. So when you're doing research, like make sure you're taking notes. Take notes on what you're reading. Right? I mean, I feel like, this is an easy step that everybody knows, but I feel like this is more about applying it, like actually doing it. You know what I mean? Because we know to take notes. We know the purpose of taking notes. Like we all like none of it. We're not dumb, right? But it's a one thing to know to take notes, but it's a whole nother thing to actually look back at it. Because honestly, even on Sundays at church, I see it. We take notes. I've done it. I take notes and stuff like that. We write down, take notes. But when do we go back and read it? When do we go back and look at it? That's important. It's not important just to take the notes. That's just half the step. But actually doing it, you know what I'm saying, or going back and reviewing it and re-looking at it is a whole nother thing, right? So we got to take notes when it comes to researching, looking up stuff. Take your notes. Take your notes and look back at your notes afterwards. Don't just take notes and just hoard all this information, right? So next, number three, when you're doing research, right, is to be mindful of chronology. Dang, that word killed me. Chronology. So be mindful of chronology. When you are studying a string of historical events, you need to know the chronological order in which they have happened. This does not mean, however, that you need to present a historical research paper in chronological order. Professional historians often think in terms of broad trends and cultural changes. You should try to think in the same way. So, this is also really important because when you're studying chronologically, it's important to know the string of historical events, right? Knowing the order of historical events, right? So not just learning about an event that happened, right? Like, for instance, like the transatlantic slave trade, right? We know the transatlantic slave trade. We know they took uh Africans that were from West Africa and stuff like that. And they took them to America, things of that nature. But not only knowing the event, like when it happened, but also know the stuff that transpired before the event. What happened before the event? Like, how did we get to this point? Like, I think this is important because when we're looking at history and things, when we're looking at events, when we're looking at things that happened, we need to make sure we're actually looking at what transpired before chronologically. Like, what happened? Like, what was the cause of the effect? Like, how did we get here? I think that's important because it is important to know the event, when it happened, what happened, and stuff like that. But we also need to know what happened before that. Honestly, what happened a few centuries before that. Like, I think that stuff is important. Like when it comes to history and learning about history and doing proper research is knowing chronologically what happened before the event, as much as what happened after the event. Because we can talk about the event and what happened afterwards per se, but what happened before it? What led to this event happening? What led up to the Holocaust? What led up to the transatlantic slave trade? What led up to this person becoming president? Or what led up to, these different, like what led up to it? What happened chronologically that we got to this point? And I think that's something we need to keep in mind as we're doing research, is not only just learning about the event and what happened afterwards, right? But also making sure before the event, we're accurately as possible looking at the chronological order of how everything transpired. Like, how did we get to this point, right? Like, how did we get here? And one thing I feel like in church, I wish we would do a lot more of, I believe, right? Because we know about the Old Testament scriptures, right? And we know about the New Testament scriptures. Like, we know about the historical scriptures and things like that. We know about those events that happened in the Bible, things like that. But I feel like sometimes we need to do a better job at the chronological, like after the scriptures were what happened after the scriptures, right? Like, they don't mention about all the early church fathers, like the continuation of the gospel and stuff like that being preached and stuff like that. Like, we need to be talking more about that. So it's not like, because like growing up, you kind of even think like, oh shoot, like, all right, Old Testament was written, New Testament was written, and then out of nowhere, it was like a big pause, and then all right, out of nowhere, all right, now we have the scriptures and stuff like that, right? It's not really, we're not really told that. I think it's a cool thing to know the history and the continuation, the chronological order. Okay, after the New Testament scriptures, now you see early church fathers in the Middle East and Africa and all these other places still continuing the gospel and preaching the gospel and stuff like that. So you let people know, like, okay, there was chronological order here. Like, there's this here, right? Which we don't talk. I mean, I get it. In a church service, you're not supposed to have like early church history, theological classes and stuff like that. But at least mention some stuff here and there. Offer other classes that talk about it, so that way people don't know. Okay, Old Testament, New Testament written. There was a big pause, and then bam, we're here. And that's not how it happened at all. There's a huge history of continuation, different locations, geography, and stuff like that when it comes to the scriptures, gospels, and stuff like that. So be mindful of the chronology of it, okay, as you're doing your research. And then number 4, this is a big one. This is a big one this is a big one. All right, this is a huge one right here. Consult primary sources. All right. A primary source is something that was written, filmed, or recorded during the era you are studying. It could be a letter, it could be a treaty, a photograph, a newspaper article, government documents, or oral history from someone who lived during the time period. Secondary sources like history textbooks can be fantastic resources, but they still reflect the biases of their authors. When you're embarking on a research project, you can often go right to the source by reading, viewing, or listening to historical documents from the era you are studying. Good research projects always rely more on primary documents than secondary sources. All right. So this is a big one. This is probably one of the biggest ones, right? Consultant and primary sources, right? So a primary source can be in many different ways. It can be written, filmed, recorded, right? And the older the document that's closer to the time period of the event, the more reliable that it is. Because which we do is there's times where people write books. There's times where people write books that has all these different claims about X, Y, and Z. but there's no primary source to back up what they're saying. That's huge. Because at the end of the day, anyone can write a book about anything claiming this happened in history, but you have to be able to prove where you got the information from. Especially when you are not in the time period or in the vicinity or don't know anybody in the time period in the vicinity. So if you're writing a book about the history of West Africans, or if you're writing a book about the history of Jews, or you're writing the history of, like, if you're writing a history book about it, or a book about history, right, then you have to be able to provide your source of where you get your information from, because you are not from that time period, right? You naturally don't know people from that time period. So you need to be quoting a historian who was closer to that time period, quoting someone who knows the historian that's closer to that time period, right? Because the closer the historical sources, the more reliable it is, because it's within the same time frame. That's how history and information works. So if you're making claims that something happened in AD 70 or AD 35 or something like that, and you have no source to prove it, then you shouldn't take it serious. Like that's just common historical research. Like, how do you do it? Like, or if the person who's quoted it is not even an expert in their field of study, right? Like, all that stuff matters when it comes to consulting primary sources. And I think a lot of us, we do ourselves a disservice because we don't properly look at sources. We're in an era where we quick to believe everything, right? And honestly, and I'm not even saying like just because there's sources that you should believe it, but you could trust that it's more reliable because it's closer to the date it was written in, versus somebody thousands of years later who has no source or nothing like that saying this stuff. But like, how are they proving it? So it's important that you are finding primary sources, like historical documents that are closer to the time period, right? Whether it's a letter, whether it's something that's written, documentary, photograph, newspaper article, government documents, oral history. Like, you have to have something from the time period that's reliable to give you evidence. Because there are people out here who write books, right? Who write books and say all these different claims that sounds good, but they're not backing it up from any historical source that's even close to the time period, or know anything about the historical source from that time period. That's how you know it's reliable, right? And we can't do ourselves a disservice by just reading certain things without properly checking the source. Because everybody, we're in a fact check era, but no one seems to still fact check properly, right? We want to check facts and make sure our facts are good and things like that, right? But when it comes to historical stuff, we don't do it properly, I feel like, or it's not encouraged to do it properly enough. Or some people might not know that you have to look at primary sources. That's how you prove things, but that's how you prove it, or that's how you have at least evidence for it. Is historical documents that are closer to the time period, or an eyewitness testimony of a document that was closer to the time period, right? Because one way you could have is a government official who was in the time period that knows the events that happened, that was close to it. Eyewitness person who wrote this down, who actually witnessed it, right? Like those stuff actually matters. Because like when you look at that scripture is written, like the actual scriptures are written in the time period. The eyewitness testimonies are written within the time period. You know what I mean? It's that's why it seems more reliable, because it's closely written to the source, right? There's multiple sources closely to it, or other sources that are historical. That's how you get any historical thing. Anything that's historical, not even just biblically. Like, anything that's historical is written by people that were either an eyewitness to it, or people who were a few years derived from the incident, or knew some people that's from the incident. Like, that's how you know it's closely reliable, by the closer the date actually is. Versus somebody who doesn't have eyewitness testimony, who doesn't know whatever the event, who wasn't there, who wasn't connected to it. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't really make any sense. You got to have sources to prove or to look up any claim. And that's an important thing for us, I feel like, to know. And we really do ourselves a disservice, like, regardless of your culture or context, of doing that when we don't consult a primary source to whatever event or thing that we are looking at. So primary sources is a huge, huge, big key thing, right? And then lastly, know where to find information. If you're an amateur history student, you might start start out your history research via online search engine. The results you find can actually be great resources early in research process, but to do great work, you'll need to dig a little deeper. The Library of Congress, the New York Public Library, the National Archives are particularly vast troves of historical documents, but they are not necessarily accessible to all members of the public. If you are a university student, you may have access to resources, or at the very least, you can make use of your campus library alone. Many big companies and institutions have the art. So, pretty much, this is also a tricky thing too, because nowhere to find history, right? And I think that's the important thing too, because certain things are not super available to everybody. You gotta do some digging, right? You gotta do some digging. So not everything might not be quickly searched from a search engine. Like especially if you're talking about historical stuff. I ain't talking about like how random holiday, like how holiday started, or like what's cancer, or what's all this stuff. Like that stuff is more. But when it comes to like something that's really old, like sometimes you have to do a little digging. Sometimes you have to check libraries. Sometimes you have to check, especially if you're a student in school, check your school's library. Like check their online library, stuff like that. Like you have to do a little digging when it comes to that, right? Because not everything is just going to be easy, an easy find, or something you easily do, right? Just do some digging. Look at some certain books. Look at books. Look at websites. If you're a student, you have access to a library. Look at the libraries, right? Look at that stuff. That and not every historical information is quickly found, right? And I think it brings me to another point, which is number 6. I'm gonna add that because there ain't no number 6. But I feel like number 6 is you're going to have to put in the work. Meaning, a lot of times we just want a quick shortcut to history, a quick shortcut to this event, a quick shortcut here and there. But sometimes it's not. A lot of times it's not. Like to really understand and learn historical stuff, you're going to have to put in work. You're going to have to read books, volumes of books. You're going to have to spend some money on a book, maybe $100, few $100 possibly, to a historical document. You know what I'm saying? Like you're going to have to actually read. It takes some time. And a lot of times we live in this microwave society where we just want things fast. We want things quick, because that's the type of life a lot of us live, especially really in Americas, right? But it sets us up because we don't want to work. We want the quick out. When it comes to history, it's not that easy. You're going to have to read. You're going to have to look at stuff and read. You're going to have to watch things. You're going to have to dig deep and try to look for stuff. You're going to have to actually spend some money on books and read it. It's going to take hard work. But if you're really looking for the truth, if you really want to learn and things like that, then it should be no problem for you spending some money or reading extra time or taking hours and working hard and understanding information. Because that's how people are historians. They went to school, they took time to read, they took time to learn, they took time to study, they sacrificed stuff they would like to do for stuff they want to do, to learn, to grow in their field, or to grow in this historical data. And they took those sacrifices. And I feel like we don't want the sacrifice. We just want to just say these claims. We don't want to do the hard work. We want people to do it for us so we can just share it and stuff like that. And that's pure laziness to me. That's laziness. And that shows to me you really don't care. You know what I'm saying? You really don't care about the information. You just want to say it, say these little claims, talk about people, then talk about this, blah, blah, blah. We can't be lazy. If you really want to know, you got to put in the work. You got to put in the work. You're going to have to work. Like there's, especially for certain events in history, it's going to take some time. You're going to have to read books that say a whole bunch of words that we don't say, or a whole bunch of time period. It might be a little boring. It is what it is. But if you really care that much about history and finding out what history and what actually happened, you'll sacrifice that. And I think that's the main point. Are you willing to work? Are you willing to read? Are you willing to spend money on books? Are you willing to do certain things to find information? I think that's the thing. And I just really want to wrap up with this point because I don't want to, go on too long. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. But when it comes to history, we gotta do ourselves a service and actually do it the right way. Because there's a right way and a wrong way to look up historical history, like historical stuff, not just easy stuff that you can find that's easy. But I'm talking about history, going back thousands of years, history. Like this stuff you can do the right way, It's just, are you going to sacrifice the right way? Are you going to actually read? Are you going to actually spend the money? Are you going to actually do these things? And I think that's the important thing. If you really want to do history and find this stuff out, because I feel like a lot of people don't know how to accurately look up things in history, like how to accurately research. And it shows by what they post. It shows by how they talk to one another. It shows by how you conduct the conversation. It literally shows all the time how to do research, proper research, writing down notes, looking at the chronological order of the things, right? Looking at primary sources, like connected to it or closely dated to it. That stuff is important when it comes to research, right? And I think it's something we can all learn, and I think it would make us. It would, it would do a huge difference to the country and everything. Everyone do the research properly, not even come to history or religion or anything like that, but even politics, stuff like that. Doing our research is important because you're really doing yourself a disservice when you don't. You really are doing yourself a disservice when you just take something, but without really proof or evidence for it. Like, okay, I'll just share this meme because it looks cool. All right. Or I'm gonna share this documentary or this book without actually reading it first. That's crazy to actually share something without reading it and looking at it first. That's all because you don't know what's in it. Just because it sounds cool, we don't know what's actually in it. And that can be dangerous because you don't know what's in it. So people are going to say you support this thing even though you don't. And that's my big thing. I think with the whole Kyrie situation, right? It's just the fact to me, if you would watch it first before you shared it, you will see the stuff that's in it. And then you can make the conscious decision like, okay, if I do want to share this, I can at least put some asterisks like, look, there's some things that we could talk about that has interesting conversation, right? If this is what we probably are. But they got some anti-Semitic stuff in it. So you know what? I don't agree with that, obviously, but I agree with the other stuff. You know what I mean? Or you just be like, you know what? I'll find another source that's talking about the same thing and not use this one because of the anti-Semitic stuff in it. But at least you understand and know what's in it before you even share it. And that's crazy to me. Like, you're gonna share something like, and I'm not even talking about just a meme. Like, everyone shared memes without looking at it. Like, that's different. It's just a meme. But when you're sharing an hour worth of documentary or a book, that's totally different. Because this is making claims about something. Or, you know what I'm saying? It's making claims about something. Like, in detail. Right? So, I think he could have avoided the whole situation if he just would have watched it first. Honestly. And that's what made me want to do it. This episode is not about Kyrie. This episode is about everybody learning how to do research properly and why it's important for us to do research and to do it the proper way. That's why I really wanted to make the podcast episode, because having conversations with people and watching how people comment and stuff like that, like, I see all their viewpoints and everything like that. But to me, I feel like what's not getting talked about enough is how to actually research something. Like, what to actually look for, how to actually look for it, how to actually weigh it. You know what I mean? Like, that stuff is important when it comes to history, right? And we're listening, and we're so receptive to listen to people who are not experts in the field, listen to people who has no, primary resources to things and all this other different stuff, YouTube videos that's not posted sources and stuff like that. We're quick to listen to it, but it's like, why not challenge that? I mean, not challenge it, but like, look it up. There's nothing wrong with it. Do yourself a service. Look it up. If someone's teaching something, they're not proving it, look it up. Look it up. There's nothing wrong with that. But you're at least doing yourself a search where you can at least say, okay, I see where he getting this point from, because it's from this article, this letter that was written from a person that was an eyewitness or someone who knows of the person that is being talked about or event or stuff like that. Because it's important. Because if you think about it, how do us today in 2022 know events that happened 2,000 years ago? How? We know it because we have documents that are closely written to events. We have eyewitness testimonies that is closely written to events. We have pictures that are closely to the event. We have letters from people that was either part of the event or know someone who's a part of the event, or at least heard about, a part of the culture part of the event that was closer to the date of what actually happened. So we could be like, okay, this is a reliable thing. Cool. All right. You know what I mean? Like that stuff is important. That's how we got the information we are at today, during today. So I just wanted to make this just for dang, I still went 30 minutes. Dang God. I just oh my Lord. But anyways, just to wrap up, guys, a good way for us to be equipped is to learn how to do research. Learn what to look for. Learn all these different things. All right. So that's pretty much all I got for you guys today. So I hope this was informational. I hope this was helpful. Stay blessed. God bless you all. Have a great week and a great day. Peace.